Well, good morning, church family. Merry Christmas season to you. Today is kind of a special Sunday because I get to introduce our guest speaker and my friend, Brad Nelson. So Brad and I met in the airport in Istanbul, Turkey, on the way to Israel, where I was doing a study trip in May, and Brad helped to facilitate that trip. And while we were in Israel, we just connected and became fast friends. And he's just one of those guys that it's easy to laugh with and then transition and have a very deep, meaningful conversation with at the same time. And so when I got back from Israel, I just didn't want to let that friendship go. And so we've been able to connect a few times since being back from Israel.
He's been a little stalkerish, I'm not gonna lie.
And it's my privilege to introduce him to you all today. So Brad served for 17 years in the local church. His experience ranged from mega church experience to planting a new church with 4 families in a cafeteria. So he's transcended the whole kind of gamut there. And he is currently the content director at Walking the Text, which is the organization that I went to Israel with. And if you are interested in going to Israel or to Turkey and doing a biblical type study trip, I would encourage you to go with Walking the Text. But without further ado, would you please give a warm EAC welcome to my friend, Brad Nelson.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you. Oh, so good to be with you. I actually have a couple of different connections to EAC. I facilitated another trip to Israel back in 2016, and there was a group of about 20 from EAC that met me in the airport, and I see one over here and my roommate, Will, back there. And I've got some great pictures of these guys in the land of Israel. And man, when you journey with people and you cover some hard miles and you sweat together and you bleed together, you really can go deep fast, can't you? And I discovered on a hike in what's called the Maktesh Ramon, it's southern Israel, down near the Negev desert, where you start to get into Egypt, where the Israelites did their wilderness wandering. That's where Connor and I really started to strike up conversation and get to know each other a little better. And so I was there over the summer with Connor and his wife Claire and Travis and Stacy, who are in the back running the show. And I just kind of fell in love with these people and how easy it was to be with them and to laugh one minute and the next minute transition into really thoughtful, meaningful conversation. And you know you're among friends when you're able to move between those two things pretty easily. And I wanted to show you this. I was able to take a picture near the end of our trip of Connor. And I'll skip ahead one slide here. And this is from the Garden of Gethsemane, looking across at the temple in Jerusalem. And we took a moment as a group to pray. And I got a picture of Connor praying in the garden with the temple in the background there. And this picture to me is so appropriate to the person that your pastor is. Such a deep-hearted man, such a person of warmth and friendship and empathy and compassion. And I am so grateful that you get to have him as your shepherd, as your pastor. And I really hope for you that you'll have opportunity to sit with him and laugh and have the rich kind of conversation that I got to have last night, way later than I should have been up. But I hope that you'll get that. And I just want to name and bless what a gift he is to me and what a gift that I know he is to your community. As he mentioned, I'm the content director at Walking the Text, so I get to lead trips to Israel, get to really help people understand the Bible in its original context. You know, sometimes what happens with the Bible is we've heard these stories before, and so we think we know what they say. But the Bible's one of those books that it just keeps working on you. There's always more. And just when you think you've got it sussed, something comes up and like a 2x4 to the face catches you off guard. And I love biblical 2x4s to the face. And so I want to talk with you about that a little bit this morning. But first, This is my wife, Trisha, my 3 daughters, Braylon, Charlotte, and Clara. And if you're thinking to yourself, 3 daughters, that's a lot of feminine energy. How are you going to pay for all those weddings? We're thinking the same thing, friends. I don't know. But that is my family, and love to be with them. But I want to talk to you this morning about Mary, the mother of Jesus. And I don't know what you think of when you think of Mary, but many people immediately have images that come to mind like this. There's a serene Mary, very pregnant, riding gently on a donkey through the woods, her male model husband, Joseph, leading her along. And here's what you got to understand. When you dig into the scriptures, this is not the picture of Joseph and Mary. Joseph and Mary were so poor that they probably couldn't have afforded a donkey. Mary probably walked to Bethlehem on her own 2 legs. Yeah, some people will picture, when they think of Mary, the nativity scene where the shepherds are crowding around and baby Jesus has this like nuclear kind of glow emanating off of him. Or people will sometimes think of just the more standard Madonna and child picture where you have this emotionless Mary who doesn't seem to have any kind of personality whatsoever. And these are the traditional sentimental images that many of us conjure to our minds when we think of Mary. And here's the thing. When you dig into the text and you start to understand what was happening in Bethlehem in Mary's life, a really different picture of Mary starts to emerge. I love the way that this New Testament scholar named Scott McKnight says it. He puts it this way: Mary was not a nice girl. Mary was a muscular, wiry woman whose eyes were aglow with a dazzling hope for justice and whose body evoked a robust confidence in the God who was about to turn the world upside down through her son. Mary has spinal fortitude. Mary is fierce. Any of you know or have had a woman in your life who you would never want to make the mistake of calling her sweet because she has the spirit of General Patton in a woman's body? Any of you know someone like this? Yes, we have 3 of them, 3 daughters in my house. That's Mary. So I want to show you just a couple of details from Luke chapter 1 that start to tease out this fierceness, this courageousness in Jesus' mother Mary. So when you look into Luke chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, we read this. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth to, and we got to stop, a virgin. So young girls in 1st century Jerusalem, Israel, Judea, the land of Israel, they were given in marriage usually between the ages of 13 and 15 years old. So already we kind of got to stop and get this image of a middle-aged Mary out of our minds and substitute a very young teenage girl. This is what we're dealing with when we read about Mary in the text. And it goes on to say that she was engaged. Now, it's not the word engaged. The technical word there in the Greek is betrothed. And I point this out to you because being betrothed in the ancient world was a lot different than getting engaged is in our world. So I've been married for 20 years, and when I asked my father-in-law's blessing, I asked for his daughter's hand in marriage. I worked up the courage, I got to the point, and I said, I would really like to marry your daughter and would love your blessing. He jumped up out of his easy chair, ran down the hall, disappeared into his office. He came running back out about 10 seconds later with her file folder of student loans. He handed it to me and said, "She's all yours." And just like that, we were engaged. Okay, that's not how it worked in Mary's world. The betrothal process in the first century was very orchestrated. There are a lot of really detailed, moving parts and pieces. And when you understand those first century betrothal details, it gives you a little insight into Mary's story that's a bit shocking. So I want to walk you through kind of the two stages of the betrothal process. So stage one started with an arrangement, right? The parents made an arrangement. But here's the thing. When we think of arranged marriages, we often think of parents picking their child's spouse, and the kids don't get any say in the matter. That was not the case. Mary and Joseph would have had some input. So they would have got to say, yeah, I'm okay with this. No, I'm not. And the parents would really have honored that. And as I mentioned, Mary would have been between the age of 13 and 15. Joseph, if this is his first marriage, would have been between the ages of 17 and 19. Now, we don't know. The text doesn't say. It's possible that Joseph could have been a widower. Many women in the ancient world died in childbirth. And so it's very possible that Joseph has been married before, that his wife has passed away, and he's marrying again. And if that's the case, he would have been older. We're not sure, but this is the age that young Jewish boys were married, between 17 and 19. But after the arrangement, you'd enter this next phase, which was called the marriage contract, or the ketubah. And the ketubah involved two things. It involved a bride price and a dowry. A bride price doesn't mean that Joseph was buying Mary. They weren't selling Mary to Joseph. What the bride price is in an ancient culture is a recognition that you have a daughter who is a valued member of your family, and she's an economic contributor. She's a part of how your family stays afloat. And so to marry her and to bring her into my household, you are actually losing an economic contributor in your household. And we want to honor that loss to your family by paying you an amount of money that will help to make up for what you'll lose with her absence. So it's a very honoring exchange. The dowry is what Mary would have brought to the marriage as her own inheritance from her family. And that dowry was there in the event that maybe Joseph would die. And if Joseph died, then Mary would have this inheritance to fall back on. If Joseph were ever to divorce her, Mary would have this dowry, this inheritance to fall back on. It would provide some protection and some economic care for her. So once Joseph and Mary's father worked out the details of the bride price and the dowry, they were considered legally married. Now here's the catch. They weren't, like the wedding hadn't taken place yet. But in the eyes of their community, they are now husband and wife. And this could only be dissolved by divorce or marriage. And this kind of time period lasted about a year. So, okay, technically you're married, but the wedding celebration isn't going to be for a year. And during that year period, you are not allowed to spend any unchaperoned time together. Why? Because they didn't want any unexpected pregnancies. You see the problem, right? You see where this is going. Now, at the end of that year, Joseph, during that year, would have gone back to his father's house, because when you got married, you didn't go build a house of your own. You built a room, an insula, onto your family home. So Joseph would have gone back to his father's house, built a room onto the family home, and when that room was done, at the end of that year, he would have gone back, led a procession to Mary's house, collected his bride, brought her back to the home that he had prepared for her, and there would have been a 7-day wedding celebration. I'm not paying for any 7-day wedding celebrations. But in the first century, they did not mess around when it came to the wedding party. So 7-day wedding celebration, And on the first night, there would be a bridal chamber. The bride and groom would go into that bridal chamber and consummate the marriage. And there would be a very public, very awkward ceremony the next morning where the guests would be shown the bloodstained cloth as a way to honor Mary's virginity. So again, do you see the tension here? Do you see the problem? This whole thing is designed so that we don't have any unexpected pregnancies. Oh, and by the way, there's going to be this big reveal moment when we prove to everybody you're a virgin. Now, once you understand all of the details and the timeline of this betrothal process, you can actually pinpoint where Mary's at in the process from what you read in the Bible. Because in Matthew chapter 1, verse 18, we read this. Now, the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together. So Mary has received her ketubah. They are legally married in the eyes of everyone, but they're not allowed to spend any time together because we don't want any unexpected pregnancies. And if Mary is found to be pregnant, her community is going to see her as an adulteress. And this is deeply, deeply dangerous for her life. The Torah in Deuteronomy 22 says this about an adulteress. If there is a young woman, a virgin already engaged to be married, and a man meets her in the town and lies with her, you shall bring both of them to the gate of that town and stone them to death. And Mary, in a Jewish community, I promise you, when she hears Gabriel's words, she knows this passage. The risk and the danger of God's plan flashes in front of Mary's mind. And see, so many of us, we're so used to the Christmas story, we skip right over and we forget that this was dangerous to Mary. This could have cost her life. I mean, even in the Roman world, Roman law required divorce for adultery. Now, a lot changed from the time the Torah was written in the Hebrew scriptures to the time you get to the Gospels and Mary and Joseph and Jesus. And so by the time Mary's on the scene, it's really unlikely that she would have been stoned to death. In fact, Craig Keener, who's this brilliant New Testament scholar, says this: in New Testament times, Joseph would have merely been required to divorce Mary and expose her to shame. So best case scenario, Mary gets divorced. She's got to go home, back to her father's house, and live out the rest of her days under the stigma of adultery. Now, you and I as Westerners, we think, oh, that's too bad, but at least she gets to live, right? Nobody's going to stone her to death. She's not going to die. But here's the thing. Mary lives in what's called an honor and shame culture, where your worth and your value are bound up with how the community perceives you. And in an honor-shame culture, the experience of public shame was worse than death. It was like being given a sentence of a living death. And this is what Mary is facing in light of the news that the angel Gabriel delivers to her. Greetings, favored one, good news. Now, you and I know, because we have the benefit of hindsight, that none of this was going to happen. That Joseph was a righteous man, that he wasn't going to mistreat Mary, but Mary didn't know that. All Mary knew is that this news could make my life really, really challenging and really awkward. And that's what makes her response so stunning. Because Mary's response to all of that is, then Mary said, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." It's like Mary does all the math in her head and says, God, If that's the risk to go along with you on the path that you're calling me to, sign me up. Here I am. May it be to me according to your word. Now, this passage, I wanted you to see this. This is in the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version. I wanted you to see it in this version because if you read this in the NIV or the King James or the ESV, pretty much any other biblical translation, what you get is just look or behold, I am the Lord's servant. You don't get that phrase, here am I. And the reason for that is the Greek expression is idu. Let me hear you say idu. It just means look or behold. It's like a Greek particle. But idu is connected to a Hebrew word called hineni. Let me hear you say hineni. All right, some of you need to wipe the spit out of the back of your hair from the person behind you. Hineni. Hineni means here I am. And this expression shows up all over the Bible, especially in the Older Testament, where God calls Abraham, and Abraham's response to God's voice is, Hineni, here I am. God calls to Moses out of the burning bush, and Moses' response is, here I am. God calls to the boy priest Samuel in the temple, in the night when he's sleeping. Samuel, what does Samuel do? He gets up and he runs to the priest and says, here I am, you called me. And the priest says, what are you talking about? I didn't call you, go back to bed. This happens 3 times. And the priest realizes, oh, the Lord is calling you. Go back to bed, and when you hear the Lord call again, say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. It happens for the prophet Isaiah. When God wonders aloud, whom shall I send, and whom shall go for us? And what does Isaiah say? Here I am, send me. So over and over again in the scriptures, when somebody uses that phrase, here I am, it's because they're answering a divine summons. They are accepting a call from God to do something meaningfully in the world. To be the kind of person to say, here I am, takes incredible courage. Rabbi Joel Nickerson says it like this. Hineni means I am present. I am ready to fill in the blank. It's a bold statement that our forefathers used in moments of significant transition, fear, or what comes next. Hineni is about being present on the precipice of change. And you've got this 13 to 15-year-old girl who knows the risks, but she says to God, here am I. God, I will walk whatever path you call me to, whatever the risk, and I trust that you're going to be there with me. See, I think that Mary is the kind of person who makes hope be born into the world. And I think that you could say that where hope is born, wherever people say, here I am. God is always and everywhere trying to be born in our midst. But the peculiar thing about God is God doesn't go it alone. God doesn't just show up and do things on God's own. God, for whatever strange reason, delights in working in partnership with people. And so God is on the lookout for people who are present enough to say, here I am, I'm here. Let it be to me according to your word. And part of what we see in Mary is she's a model of discipleship. She shows us what it looks like to be the kind of person who can say, here I am, and can birth hope into the world. Now, I grew up as a pastor's kid. Don't hold it against me. Got a lot of stories. Pastor's kid, my dad is still the pastor of the Southern Baptist Church that I grew up going to. So I have sat through Sunday mornings, Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, revival services. Boy, I have heard all the sermons. And this funny thing happened to me as a kid. Every now and again, you'd get a preacher or a teacher, and it was a good one. Oh, you're just sitting there like, oh, yes, this person knows. They know what it feels like. They know what's going on in my heart. And I'm thinking to myself, they're finally going to tell me how. They're going to finally tell me how to live this way. And they would get right up to that point and they would end the sermon. And I would think, but how? How do I do that? So I want to ask that question, how do we become the kind of people like Mary who say, here I am? How do we become the kind of people through whom hope can be born into the world? And I think saying, here I am, involves three things. First, we've just talked about Mary's courage. So it takes a little bit of courage, willing to show up to hard things and challenging things in life. But there's also this element of awareness. So when Moses says to God, here I am in the desert, he's standing in front of a burning bush. Interesting thing about the desert, burning bushes are not uncommon. As strange as this seems, what will happen is that you get these winds blowing off the Mediterranean Ocean, and they can be pretty fierce. And those winds will hit these dry bushes and will charge them with electrostatic energy. So then, if an animal scurries by or somebody walks by and there's a spark, a bush can ignite. So my guide, Yehuda, in Israel, he's a desert survivalist. He has seen burning bushes all the time. So that Moses, being a shepherd in the desert, seeing a burning bush is not something that's unusual. This would have been commonplace for him. What's unusual is that Moses watched the bush long enough to realize, wait a second, it's not being burned up. The miracle is that Moses noticed. He's aware. The kind of people who say, here I am to God, have a unique awareness and sensitivity to what God's doing around them, to what God's doing within them, to what's happening in the world around them. And then there's this element of availability. It's not just that they're courageous, it's not just that they're aware, but they're available to go on the journey. So this is a picture of a man named Sir Nicholas Winton. In 1938, Nicholas Winton was about to leave on a ski vacation in Switzerland when he got a phone call from a friend, a colleague. And this friend of his was in Czechoslovakia. And he was working there with children. As the war in Europe was raging, it was looking more and more like the Nazis were going to invade Czechoslovakia. And his friend called Sir Nicholas Winton and said, I know you're about to go on this ski vacation, but there are a lot of children in trouble here. If you could, just give me a couple days, come see me in Czechoslovakia. Sir Nicholas Winton was available. He put his ski vacation on hold and he went to Czechoslovakia. And what he saw scared the living daylights out of him. And so without any sanction from the British government, he turned his hotel room into an office and he started processing paperwork to rescue many Jewish children from the oncoming Nazi invasion. And in the end, he ended up rescuing 669 children. Now, I want to show you a moment where he meets some of these children.
Vera Gissing is with us here tonight. Hello, Vera. And I should tell you that you are actually sitting next to Nicholas Winton. Hello.
Thank you. I wore this around my neck, and this is the actual pass that we were given to come to England. And I'm another of the children that you saved.
Can I ask, is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please?
Courage, awareness, and availability. My friends, when those three things converge in your life, like Mary, you are capable of birthing hope into the world. And I believe that that is what God designed us for, to be a conduit of God's undying love for a broken and hurting world. How is God inviting you to be courageous? Is there anything in your life that God's inviting you to show up to with all of yourself? Something that you've been avoiding, suppressing, denying, not facing. And maybe this Christmas season, part of the way that hope is born in the world is that you trust God to give you the courage to show up with strength, to show up and confront what needs to be confronted, knowing that Spirit will be there giving you what you need to do it. Maybe some of you just need to have eyes to see and be aware of what's happening around you. Friends, Christmas is so busy. We get going 100 miles an hour, and it's like we stop seeing what's happening around us. Last week, I was in Nashville for work, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Wednesday night, my flight gets delayed to come home. I get home 1 o'clock in the morning, Thursday morning. 5 hours later at 6 a.m., my family starts loading up the moving truck. We sold our home in Ocala. We moved to Georgia. So Thursday morning, we load up, we drive to Georgia. Friday morning, we unload all of our belongings, get a couple hours of sleep. Saturday morning, we jump in a car, drive to Edgewater. My wife says to me on the drive, "How you feeling?" I said, "I have no idea." I'm going so fast. I'm not even aware of what's happening within me or around me. And that happens to us during the holidays. It's like our awareness, our senses get dull. My friends, be still. Open your eyes. Ask Spirit to help you see what Spirit needs you to see. And then are you available? You don't have to have all the answers. You don't got to be a hero that solves the problem. Are you available? Can you say, "Okay, God, I'll make that phone call. I'll talk to that person. I'll go run slides. I'll go ring a bell. I'll take a meal," whatever it looks like, are you available? But when those three things converge, your courage, your awareness, and your availability, we can become the kind of people who say, "Here I am," and hope can be born in the world. Let's pray. Gracious God, we love you and we thank you for your kind and tender presence in our lives. And God, I hold my palms open to you now as a symbol of taking my own inner life and the inner life of everybody in this community and just holding it before you with open hands and asking you to see it, to see the hurt, to see the confusion, to see the fear, to see the boredom, to see the questions, to see all of the things that are living within us that each of us dragged into this room with us this morning. And I ask God that you, by the power of your Spirit, would give us what we need to confront what's in our hearts. For those of us who need comfort, I ask for your comfort. For those of us who need to be disrupted and need a holy kick in the pants, God, would you give it? Jesus, we invite you into our lives. And like your mother Mary, we want to be a conduit of your goodness and grace to the world around us. Speak to us today. Help us see what we need to see, and then give us the feet to walk the path you're inviting us to. And God, I want you to hear from this church these words. Here we are. May it be to us according to your word. And we ask all of this, Jesus, in your strong, resurrected name. Amen. Go in peace and have a great week.